I moved into the house on Oakridge Street on a cold Monday evening. The place wasn't impressive from the outside. Peeling gray paint, a sagging porch, a yard littered with last autumn's leaves. But the rent was cheap, and I didn't have many options. I had just started a new job in the city, and every apartment I visited was either too expensive or too cramped. So I convinced myself this place had character, even though something about it made my skin tighten the first time I saw it. The landlord, a quiet old man named Harris, handed me the keys without much conversation. He only said one thing that stuck with me. If you ever hear anything strange at night, just ignore it. Old houses make noises. At the time, I laughed it off. Houses settling, pipes knocking, nothing unusual. But the way he said it, without meeting my eyes, felt like a warning wrapped in an excuse. The first few nights were uneventful. I spent most of my time unpacking boxes, trying to turn the dusty old rooms into something that felt like home. The house was bigger than I needed. 3 bedrooms, an attic, and a basement I didn't bother checking because the door was stuck. Every night, around 11, I'd make tea, sit in the living room, and listen to the wind rustling through the trees. It was peaceful, in a lonely sort of way. On the 4th night, just as I was brushing my teeth, I heard it. A faint thump, then another. It sounded like something hitting the floor. Slow, deliberate, spaced apart. At first, I thought it was coming from outside. But when I paused to listen, the sound repeated, echoing through the floorboards under my feet. It was coming from the basement. I stood still for almost a minute, toothbrush in hand, waiting for the sound to repeat. It didn't. I shook it off, finished brushing, and went to bed telling myself it was just the house settling. But I didn't sleep easily. My dreams were restless, and every time I drifted off, I heard that slow, heavy thumping again, like footsteps climbing up from the darkness. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I went to the basement door and forced it open with a hard shove. Rust fell from the hinges, and a cold draft rushed into the hallway. The staircase was narrow and steep, illuminated by a single chain light hanging from the ceiling. When I pulled it, the bulb flickered a few times before settling into a weak orange glow. The basement was mostly empty. Concrete floor, cracked walls, a few wooden shelves leaning sideways. But in the far corner, something caught my eye. A small wooden chair. Nothing unusual about a chair by itself, but what bothered me was that it was placed directly in the center of a circular imprint on the dusty floor, like it had been dragged there recently. And there were scratches on the floor near it, long, uneven marks leading toward the stairs. I didn't stay long. The air felt colder than it should have been, thick and damp, and the silence had a pressure to it, like the room was holding its breath. I went back upstairs and closed the door harder than necessary. I told myself I wouldn't go down there again unless I had to. That night, the sounds returned, louder this time. Not thumps, but dragging, scraping noises, as if something heavy was being pulled across the concrete floor. I froze in my bed, listening as the sounds grew sharper. I turned on my bedside lamp and sat upright, trying to convince myself it was just the old wooden shelves shifting. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Around 3 in the morning, the noise stopped. I waited another hour before I managed to fall asleep. The next day, I called the landlord. When I explained what I'd been hearing, he didn't sound surprised. He didn't even sound worried. He just sighed and said, "Don't go into the basement at night and keep the door locked." Before I could ask why, he hung up. That night, I did exactly as he said. Locked the basement door, pushed a chair in front of it for good measure, and tried to keep my mind occupied with TV. Around midnight, the sounds returned, louder than ever. Something slammed against the door from the other side, so hard the chair rattled across the floor. I jumped to my feet, heart pounding, staring at the doorknob as it jerked back and forth, like someone was twisting it. I backed away slowly, not daring to make a sound. The banging continued, growing faster, more violent. The entire door shuddered in its frame. For a moment, I thought it was going to break open. Then, suddenly, everything went silent. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light on, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally rose, I approached the basement door again. The wood was splintered, cracked near the hinges, as if something had struck it repeatedly from the inside. I removed the chair and slowly opened the door, half expecting something to leap out. But the basement was still and quiet. I went down the stairs again, even though every instinct screamed at me not to. When I reached the bottom, the first thing I noticed was the chair in the far corner. It wasn't in the circle anymore. It was facing the stairs now. And sitting on the seat, tilted to one side, was a photograph. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was an old picture, faded and yellowed. A young man stood on the porch of the same house, smiling stiffly. But someone had scratched out his eyes with something sharp. On the back of the photo was a single sentence written in shaky handwriting. "He won't let me leave." The room felt colder suddenly, and I realized the air behind me had shifted. I turned slowly, every muscle tensed. At the top of the stairs, the basement door slammed shut, hard enough to shake the walls. I ran. I didn't think, didn't look back, didn't care about my belongings. I rushed up the stairs, threw my body against the door, and forced it open just enough to slip out. I grabbed my keys and bolted out of the house, not stopping until I reached the car. I never went back for my things. I never spoke to the landlord again. I don't know what lives in that basement or who the man in the photo was. All I know is that someone or something wanted out, and it wasn't going to stop at knocking. Let's move on to the next horror story. I started working as a security guard at the old Crestwood Research Facility on the outskirts of town. The place had been shut down for nearly 5 years after funding was cut, but the company still hired guards to watch the building at night. My job was simple: check the cameras, walk the halls twice a shift, and write a short report before dawn. Easy money, or so I told myself. My first impression of Crestwood was that it looked dead. A long, low concrete building, windows covered with dust, and a huge chain-link fence around the property. When I walked inside for the first time, the sound of my boots echoed so loudly that it felt like I wasn't alone. The air smelled like chemicals and old books. and every corner seemed darker than it should have been. My supervisor, an older guy named Davies, gave me a quick tour and the keys. Before he left, he paused at the end of the hallway and said something strange. "If you hear footsteps in the West Wing, ignore them. That wing is sealed." He walked out before I could ask what he meant. The first 2 nights were boring. I sat in the control room, sipping terrible vending machine coffee and watching the flickering screens. Most of the cameras worked, though a few, especially the ones in the West Wing, constantly glitched, freezing and jumping like an old VHS tape. I didn't think much of it. Old wiring, old equipment. Everything changed on the 3rd night. It was around 1:30 a.m. I was doing my routine walk, flashlight in hand, stopping at every checkpoint. When I passed the West Wing door, the sealed one, it was colder than the rest of the building. Not normal cold, but the kind that sinks into your chest, like you're stepping into a freezer. I pressed my hand against the metal and pulled it back instantly. It felt like ice. That was when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, measured. They were coming from behind the sealed door. I froze, the beam of my flashlight trembling against the floor. At first, I thought another guard might have come in without checking in. But the steps didn't sound like a normal person's walk. There was a dragging rhythm to them, as if whoever or whatever was walking had one bad leg. I stepped back quietly, heart pounding, and made my way to the control room. I didn't want to admit it, but my hands were shaking when I switched on the camera feed for the West Wing. The monitors fidgeted and glitched, static crawling across the screen. For a moment, I saw nothing but darkness. Then the image stabilized. A hallway appeared, long, empty, lit by weak green emergency lights. And at the far end of that hallway, something moved. It wasn't clear at first. Just a dark blur, like a person standing slouched forward. The camera flickered. When it came back, the dark shape was closer. I leaned toward the screen, heart racing. The camera flickered again. Now it was halfway down the hall. I swear I stopped breathing. It wasn't walking. It was jerking forward in these sudden, unnatural movements. Its limbs twisted and bent like it didn't know how to use them properly. Its head hung to one side, and every couple of seconds, it snapped upward sharply, like it was sniffing the air. The screen cut to static. I jumped out of the chair so fast, it almost fell over. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I forced myself to take a breath. Curiosity has ruined better people than me, but it also keeps guards awake. I grabbed my flashlight and approached the West Wing door again. It was warm now, not warm like room temperature, warm like someone had pressed their hand against it for hours. That terrified me more than anything I had seen on the screen. I backed away and returned to the control room. But as soon as I reached for the radio to call Davies, the cameras flicked on by themselves. Every screen, every wing, every hallway, and something was wrong with all of them. Objects were moved, chairs facing the wrong direction, doors open that I had closed, lights flickering in rooms that had no power running to them. And then, one by one, the cameras began to show the same thing. A figure standing just out of clear view. Sometimes it was at the end of a hall, sometimes behind a corner, sometimes very close to the lens, so close that only darkness filled the screen, except for one faint outline of a face, twisted and staring directly at the camera. Every monitor blinked with static, then went black. The building fell silent. I grabbed my jacket and keys and headed for the exit. I kept telling myself I'd explain everything later, that no job was worth staying there. But as I reached the front doors, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered it without thinking. A low, distorted voice filled my ear. Not spoken, but whispered, drawn out like breath dragging through water. "Why are you leaving the West Wing?" My throat closed. I couldn't respond. Then the whisper changed, growing rough, almost angry. "Come back." Something slammed behind me. I spun around with my flashlight, pointing it toward the long, empty lobby. The double doors leading to the West Wing were open, wide open. Even though I had locked them, a shape stood between them. Tall, wrong, bent at the waist, its hands dangling too low, and its head was slowly turning toward me. I didn't wait to see its face. I ran. When I reached the parking lot, I didn't look back. Not once. I drove away so fast, my tires screeched against the pavement. I didn't stop driving until I saw the lights of the city. I quit the next morning. No explanation, no report. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I swear I still hear that dragging step behind me. And sometimes, when my phone rings from an unknown number, I don't pick up. I already know what the voice would whisper. Come back. Let's move on to the next horror story. I moved into my new house in early September, thinking I had finally found some peace after years of shifting from place to place. It was small, quiet, and cheap, almost suspiciously cheap. The only unusual thing was the old graveyard right across the street. The stones were cracked, the ground uneven, and most of the graves looked more than a century old. But I told myself it didn't matter. I'd be inside at night anyway. On my first evening there, just after midnight, I heard it, a faint sound drifting through my open window. At first, it was hard to identify, like wind moving through dry leaves. But as I listened more carefully, I realized it wasn't the wind. It was a voice, a long, low moan rising from the direction of the graveyard. I closed the window and tried to sleep, convincing myself that maybe an animal had wandered in, stray dogs maybe. But deep down, something unsettled me. Animals didn't sound like that. Animals didn't cry like someone calling out for help. The next day, I mentioned it to an old shopkeeper in the neighborhood. His expression changed immediately. He lowered his voice and said, "If you live near that graveyard, don't open your window after dark, and don't answer if someone calls your name at night." He refused to say anything more. I laughed it off at the time. Superstitions, I thought. Old people and their stories. But that night, the voice returned. At first, just the same distant moan. But then it grew sharper, clearer, as if whoever was making it was coming closer to my house. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The sound stretched out long, like someone exhaling all their breath in one painful cry. I approached the window slowly and peeked through the blinds. The graveyard was silent. Nothing moved. But one grave, directly in the center, seemed to have a dark shape leaning over it, hunched and still. I blinked, and the shape was gone, like it had never been there. I shut the blinds quickly and stayed awake the rest of the night. The next evening, I tried to distract myself. TV, music, anything. But around midnight, the house grew cold. Colder than outside. Colder than any weather could explain. The windows began to rattle softly, though there was no wind. And then the voice came again. This time, louder, filled with something that sounded like desperation. It was saying something, whispering something, over and over. At first, it was hard to understand, but as it grew clearer, I realized it was calling a name. My name. I froze. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The sound came from outside, right outside my window. Long, broken whispers dragging through the night. Please, open. I stumbled backward, knocking over the chair beside my bed. The whisper grew frustrated. Open the door. Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, but adrenaline pushed me toward the living room, where I checked the lock twice, then 3 times. Suddenly, something scraped harshly against the front door, as though nails dragged slowly across the wood. I backed away, shaking, and the scraping stopped. But 1 second later, the voice whispered again, now right behind the door. Let me in. I didn't respond. I just pressed myself against the opposite wall, trembling. After a long silence, the footsteps moved away. Slow, dragging steps, crossing the front porch, moving toward the street. I didn't dare look outside. When morning arrived, I found long, crooked scratches all over the door. Deep ones. 2, as if made by fingers far stronger than human hands. I told myself I'd leave that night, pack a bag and go anywhere else. But fate didn't give me the chance. That evening, just after sunset, the electricity went out. Not just in my house, on the whole street. Everything plunged into darkness. I could see the graveyard more clearly without streetlights. Moonlight washed over the tombstones, giving them a pale, ghostly glow. As the silence settled, the voice rose again. Not distant this time, not from the graveyard, but from inside my yard. It was louder, angrier, almost growling. You should have opened. I grabbed my phone, but the screen stayed black, dead. Suddenly, something slammed into the side of my house. Then again, and again. Heavy blows, as if someone was throwing their whole weight against the walls. I stumbled backward, hiding in the hallway. Then came the sound I feared most. The front door handle turned, slowly, deliberately, even though I had locked it. The door creaked open by an inch. A cold wind rushed inside, carrying a smell like damp earth and old flowers. And in the crack of the door, I saw an eye, pale, clouded, unblinking, staring directly at me. I slammed the door with all the strength I had, braced it with my body, and held it until the sun began to rise. Only when daylight filled the sky did the pounding stop. Only then did the cold leave my house. I moved out that morning, leaving most of my things behind. A week later, a neighbor told me something I wish I had known earlier. Many years ago, a body went missing from that graveyard. A man buried alone, forgotten by family, his grave unmarked. The caretaker said sometimes on cold nights, people still heard him calling out from the earth, begging to be let out. But I didn't hear someone begging. I heard someone searching. And I know one thing for certain. Whatever was outside my house that night wasn't trying to escape the grave. It was trying to get inside. That's all for today. If you like the video, make sure to subscribe. See you guys in the next video.